Welcome to Penn State Reads. Aside from new student orientation, participation in Penn State Reads will be your first sanctioned experience with the university. Each year, Penn State selects one book that the university encourages each of its incoming students to read before the start of the fall semester. For the class of 2019, The Boom by Wall Street Journal senior energy reporter Russell Gold was selected. If participation in Penn State Reads is broad enough, it might be the extramural activity that more of you will share with your classmates than any other experience you have during your 4 years at Penn State. My name is Terry Engelder. In addition to being a professor of geosciences at University Park, I am a character in The Boom. I am best known for my research on fractures in gas shale, including the Marcellus, dating back to the 1970s. My research on gas shale culminated in a 2007 resource assessment of the Marcellus, which indicated that the Appalachian Basin was about to become the largest unconventional gas field in the world. The Boom is about some of the people and events that ignited the American energy revolution and changed the world. I am one of those people who helped change Pennsylvania, bring the term fracking into the English lexicon, and make the Marcellus gas shale world famous. I watched the events described within The Boom unfold. But first, a little bit about me. You are about to follow the same trail that I walked 51 years ago. You see, I matriculated at Penn State in the fall of 1964, and I felt the same emotions and feelings that you are about to experience. Being from another state, my mother had to drive me to the campus for new student orientation early in the summer, an experience many of you are having right now. The only hotel room available at the time was a room in the Nittany Lion Inn with one double bed. The most awkward moment I ever had with my mother was when I realized that we would be sharing the same bed the night before my day of placement testing. Embarrassing as it was for me, we seemed to survive, none the worse for wear. Another emotion some of you will be feeling is homesickness, being dropped off on campus in the fall. I felt it largely because, as a varsity athlete, I was dropped off early to a largely deserted campus. Before you read The Boom, there is a rich background that will make your reading experience more enjoyable. To help, I put together a timeline for a few of the events that you will read about in The Boom. The majority of your classmates were born during 1997, so I will start the timeline there. To measure time, your grade in school is indicated along the horizontal axis. One character who plays a crucial role in The Boom before your birth was George Mitchell, as described in Chapter 5. Be alert for the next time I mention Mr. Mitchell's name. 1997 was the year that two very important events in a brief history leading to Russell Gold writing The Boom. First, we geologists has known for a long time that black shale contained lots of gas. Geologists and petroleum engineers collaborated to figure out how to make that gas flow to a gas well. In Chapter 6 of The Boom, you will read about Nick Steinbrenner and how he tested a well called S.H. Griffin. Wells are named after the farm on which the well was drilled. Starting in 1996, he used frac fluid, which we call slick water. In 1998, a slick water test for the S.H. Griffin proved to be the key to unlocking flow from gas shale, including the Marcellus. While Nick Steinsberger was testing slick water, experts on climate change were meeting in Kyoto, Japan to discuss what had to be done to slow the rate at which fossil fuel consumption was pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The premise for the meeting was that global warming exists and that man-made CO2 emissions caused it. A protocol came out of the meeting that the major consuming countries of the world should decrease their greenhouse gas emissions by 5% compared with 1990 levels. Just to keep track of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere since your birth and the Kyoto Protocol, I add a graph of CO2 concentration in parts per million in the atmosphere, showing that at birth you were breathing an atmosphere with 364 parts per million CO2. You were in second grade before the Marcellus gas shale was tested using slickwater by a company called Range Resources. You will come across this fact in Chapter 10. The gas shale revolution depended on the perfection of two techniques by industry. I mentioned that slickwater fracking was the first. The second was the development of a reliable system for steering horizontal wells in shale. This was first perfected by Devon Energy as described in Chapter 7. Horizontal drilling techniques arrived in the Appalachian Basin when you were in fourth grade. You were in fifth grade when I was first approached by Ralph Eads' company on Madison Avenue to assess the economic value of the Marcellus for investors. Eads is introduced in Chapter 8. My assessment more or less brought the public's attention to gas shale in Pennsylvania for the first time. One headline read, "Giant Gas Field Found in Appalachia." In many regards, I became the face of the Marcellus Shale without ever drilling a single well. In a sense, these were the happy days before environmental concerns emerged. You were in seventh grade when the full force of the industry landed in Pennsylvania. I remember the explosive increase in gas-related truck traffic during this period. In the core areas of drilling activity, there were no places for workers to live. There was constant noise. In a sense, Pennsylvania was being transformed overnight. You will read about how the people of Sullivan County reacted to industry. Gould's focus on Sullivan County comes from the property that his parents own in the county. Many people in rural parts of the state did not like it, as described by John Trello at the end of Chapter 10. The expression NIMBY, not in my backyard, became common. Russell Gould describes the hypocrisy of a willingness to consume energy while protesting against energy production. 2009 was the year that Chesapeake Energy became the champion of natural gas. You will read about the CEO of Chesapeake, Aubrey McClendon, in Chapters 8 and 9. But there are also environmental concerns about water and air, as explained in Chapters 12 and 13. Just to the northeast of Sullivan County, the people of Dimmock complained that fracking was causing groundwater contamination. This was also the year that the term fracking entered the English lexicon, when McClendon was shouted off the stage at Harvard University by students shouting, "Frack you, frack you." By 2010, the fractivists and drillers were shouting back and forth at each other as the fracking debate heated up. I tried to find a middle ground in my Philadelphia Inquirer op-ed, A Gusher of Hogwash. I am a character in Chapter 10 of the boom. As the face of the Marcellus, I was asked to defend industry against its most visible academic protagonist, Tony Ingraffia of Cornell. The Sullivan County debate between Professor Ingraffia and me took place when you were in ninth grade. You were in 10th grade when the Pennsylvania DEP and the U.S. EPA found that there were no drilling chemicals in the water of Dimmock, and the extent of Dimmock contamination was greatly exaggerated. Nevertheless, fracking got a black eye from complaints about the drillers. The boom was published during the late spring of your junior year. By the end of 2014, the concentration of CO2 had reached 399 parts per million. The Kyoto Protocol had not been honored by America, and internationally it had no effect in slowing the growth of human carbon footprint. Very few doubt that one of the greatest challenges facing humanity in the 21st century is the transition to a carbon-neutral future. During this transition, a large and growing fraction of the world's oil and gas demand must be supplied by gas shale like that seen here at Taganic Falls in New York. This outcrop shows the fractures that have been the focus of my research over the past 35 years. You can see my Carver scale and a horizontal well, which has a much smaller diameter than in this illustration. However, the fractures in this outcrop give a good indication of what fracking must look like more than a mile under the surface. The boom is written about the extraction of gas and oil from these various rocks, yet the associated environmental costs engender opposition to their development. The proposition that limiting future global warming requires holding atmospheric CO2 concentrations below a target value leads inexorably to the conclusion that most of the world's fossil fuels would have to remain underground. The boom only hints at the environmental costs when briefly covering the Sullivan County fracking debate between Professor Ingraffia and me. In the academic world, the fracking debate started arguably with an op-ed that I wrote for the Philadelphia Inquirer in 2010. Through the grapevine, I had heard that a Cornell University scientist, Robert Hallworth, was arguing that natural gas was at least as harmful to the environment as coal. The editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer called such arguments and counter-arguments by the drillers as a gusher of hogwash. At the time of the op-ed, I had no idea that Tony Ingraffia had agreed to join Professor Hallworth in this argument. Following the op-ed, the editor of the prestigious British science journal Nature asked Hallworth plus Ingraffia and me to write a point-counterpoint on the question, should fracking stop? Neither of us were told who would be writing the opposite view. With the 2011 publication of this Nature article, the fracking debate turned into a proxy for the much larger and more contentious climate change debate. Professor Ingraffia and I met head-to-head 5 times, starting with the Sullivan County debate in January of 2011, as described in the boom. Twice in Pennsylvania, twice in New York, and once in Texas, with the most recent meeting in June of 2014. In each of these 5 debates, it is reasonably certain that Professor Ingraffia held home court advantage during the debates. People in the audience were openly hostile to the development of gas shale and were not afraid to let their feelings be known. This is best illustrated with the entry in my desk log number 36, which I passed through the audience for an attendance list at the Sullivan County debate. You can see the names of 2 characters from the boom. Other attendees expressed their unhappiness with the drillers. However, someone at the Sullivan County debate wrote into my desk log in bold letters, "Greed equals death." At the time, this entry into my desk log by someone who did not have the courage to identify themselves was chilling. My desk log number 43 includes entries from a talk I gave in Romania. The author only identified himself or herself as Frack Free Romania. The entry reads, "We will not buy your corporate half-truths that try to manipulate science. Romania and Europe will not be fracked. Mr. Dr. Strangelove of fracking." This entry gives an indication of just how irrational people can be when protesting the production of energy. Wherever I went over the past 8 years, more than half of the 395 talks I've given on the subject, the audience placed me in the role of the bad guy, trying, somehow, to ruin the world. In a very modest way, the boom documents my experience with the transformation of the American energy portfolio. I worked with, or at least met, a minimum of 16 characters about whom you will read. Some of the more famous, like George Mitchell, T. Boone Pickens, and Aubrey McClendon, have signed this Time magazine cover story devoting 9 column inches to an interview I gave. You will recognize the signature of 2 Pennsylvania governors, including Corbett, who invited me to serve on his Marcellus Shale Advisory Commission. You will also recognize that I am not the only Penn State alum to sign the cover of this Time magazine. George Mitchell, the same man mentioned in Chapter 5, Gary Lash, and I shared a position on Foreign Policy Magazine's 2011 list of top 100 global thinkers for upending the geopolitics of fracking. There are plenty of historically significant names on this list, including the leaders of Germany, France, and Great Britain, plus 2 presidents of the United States. You will recognize Facebook's founder, Mark Zuckerberg. For me, it was the pinnacle of my career to be considered on par with these luminaries. As an additional background piece to the boom, I invite you to view my TED Talk, a 12-minute presentation entitled The Fracking Debate. Thank you, and good luck with your 4 years at one of the world's finest universities. We are Penn State.